So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this panel, How AI is Becoming a Real Commodity in Today's World. So AI and machine learning have emerged as some of the biggest buzzwords in the world of technology, with organizations embracing these quite enthusiastically. Joining me for this session are some exceptional professionals that are also some of my favorite in the industry. I can tell you that among the five of us, we have nine, I think, engineering, science, or computer science degrees, and that Orna is seriously raising our average. We have with us Orna. She's one of my personal role models and honestly requires no introduction. But just to embarrass her a little bit, she's an entrepreneur, a scientist, a policymaker, and an industry executive. She was the chief scientist. She was the director of the Industrial R&D Administration, co-founded Orna, held research position at Unisys and IBM. She was the chair of the board of PrimeSense and a corporate VP and general manager at EMC and Dell. She led a committee to design and set the national program for quantum science and technology, and separately today co-leads a related subcommittee specifying the computer power infrastructure required for AI. We have Ronen Lavi. He's the co-founder and the CEO of Navina. Ronen spent the last decade managing data science projects and leading the AI lab of the Israeli military intelligence. His focus was developing AI decision support systems for frontline decision makers in real time, based on multiple sources and massive amounts of data. When leaving the military, he decided to take that experience and apply it to the pitfalls of the healthcare system. We also have Rotem Alaluf as the founder and CEO of BeyondMinds, which creates the next generation AI platforms that enable enterprises to bring AI to production with robustness, accuracy, and speed that were previously unimaginable. Rotem is about creating more stable and more accurate methods of bringing the power of AI to production in order to create a significant impact for real-world use cases and accelerating AI transformation. Last but definitely not least, we have Tannor. He's the co-founder and CEO of Deepchecks, an extremely exciting startup in the space of MLOps. Deepchecks are building guardrails for machine learning systems by creating algorithms that can automatically check them. Experienced data scientist, and in the past led a top-tier research group that tackled difficult machine learning problems in computer vision, NLP, and more. If that's not enough, he's also a Torpedo graduate. So we've established that we have a great panel with us. Let's start and have fun. I have one question to start with for all of you. We're going to start with Orna. So other than being a buzzword, there seems to be real business behind the buzz. Gartner's CIO survey found that in the last 4 years, I think, AI implementation grew by a massive 270%. So can you share, each from your own perspective, the process that you see organizations going through with AI adoption?
So I will say, briefly, that you need to be digitally mature. The bigger you are, the more space you have to adopt AI. This doesn't mean that it's against startups. It's about adoption of AI. It is about adoption of new technologies. It's about support at the C-level. And it is a preference of growth over saving. And it is about the ability to adopt AI in core activities. And I think those are the principles that differentiate between businesses, and consequently companies like Telco and up there, where companies that are producing education need to create an individual application per case, rather than use an infrastructure and adopt applications as part of a suite. So there is a big differentiation between the systems, and I am extremely critical of what is happening on a national base in the public sector in Israel, and that is something that we can talk about later.
Yeah, we will definitely touch upon that. Ronen, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the best way to show the importance of AI for primary care physician, where Navina is going, it's to go to an example I experienced a few days ago. We were attending a virtual conference with a virtual booth. It was quite a strange experience, talking to physicians in their pajamas. But seriously, it was one of the biggest conferences of family physicians led by American Academy of Family Physicians. And on one of the panels we participated was called The Practice of the Future. And it was led by the vice president of the organization. And it was very well described about the age. The first slide that was going in the beginning of the panel was, Stanford University finds that AI is outpacing Moore's law. I think it shows how strongly they feel about the need of AI potential for healthcare, and the AFP represents almost a third of all primary care physicians in the US.
That's interesting. And you think that a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, the perspective was different?
No, I think it took some time. It's going to take some time even from now, but the understanding about the importance of AI and the potential of using AI for doing all kind of things that getting for physician burden will be adopted very fast pretty soon.
Yeah, and also with you, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Philip, your thoughts?
Yeah.
Right. So that figure, I have to say, when you said it, it really didn't surprise me. And I think it's very interesting because I think that the difference between last year and this year, if I would look, just at the companies that I end up talking to, I would say that last year was kind of a nutty professor game kind of research thing still. So they did have machine learning models in production, many organizations that I talked to, but a lot of times it felt like it was a quick win. It was something that you had to do kind of to educate internally the organization that you're working with. Now, what I see now with the same people, when I come back to them, let's say a year later and talk to them, they're talking about completely different issues, which are much more, if we talked about, let's say, digital maturity or AI maturity, they talk about missing values in the data coming in and things that have to do with their servers and concept drift. These are the types of issues that come up when you really care about the output of the machine learning model. So I really see some sort of transition from something that's kind of an exploration game to something that's really a real product.
Yeah, and probably more to come. Rotem, what about you?
Yeah, so I'll be happy to end this with a suggestion for enterprises today. So my suggestion is for enterprises is to start transforming their business as soon as possible. If we are looking back at Fortune 500 lists, for example, of 2 decades ago, about 50% of those listed companies don't exist anymore. A more innovative and more efficient competitor replaced them and become the new market leader. This process happening across all industries as we see it, and will continue to happen. So adopting AI technologies is crucial for enterprises in order to stay competitive and efficient, and it's something that they should start as soon as possible. And now we are in a mature phase of AI that is the right time to go for enterprises, as we see that.
Interesting. Orna, you promised some criticism. So you're heading a committee looking at AI use cases in different government verticals. Can you tell us a little bit about this project? Wait, you're on mute? There always has to be someone on mute in conferences.
No, that's okay. First of all, this committee is not a subcommittee of the previous one. It's a committee that was put together by all the research and development authorities, Ministry of Science and Ministry of Finance, under the TELEM in the Academy of Sciences. So this is important. When I look at the Israeli scene, and in general, when I look at countries, states that adopted the AI, then out of 54 countries, Israel stands in the 12th place. Sounds reasonable, but it ain't so, because in the availability of professionals, it's in the 13th place. Already 13th versus 12, you know that people will be expensive. Then the next item is that the infrastructure in Israel is ranked 36 out of 54. Adoption and operations are 50 out of 54, and a lot of it is in natural language processing. then comes innovation and research and as well as innovation and development. And this comes in 5th place out of 54, which is great. Then we drop down into 46th place in government policy and into 3rd place, where you belong, in private funding. So discrepancies like that mean that the utilization and the growth factor cannot be as fast as possible. In order for a waterfall model rather than eye of the storm model, that you risk more and you lose more, we need to advance other parts as well. And this applies to education. The potential of people who can go through digital literacy is much higher than actually are going through digital literacy. So when you ask me about what needs to be done, there are core areas in AI, and there is linkage to the data that need to be done in a much better way. And we have seen what has happened with the corona. It needed the intelligence to go in, it needed the various military units to go in, and it hasn't been preserved. They left after the first cycle, and the data went back into the owners like HMOs and such. So the data resources to be shared are vacated, and this is a very bad situation and needs to be managed completely differently. And in my mind, here we come with the potential strengths that we have, that we're a small country and we do have very strong relationship between academia, and I can talk about the role of academia, but only if you ask, industry, defense, and government. Government needs to adopt. So somebody told me, well, the government is all bad. I said, no, the Ministry of Interiors, when I ask something on the internet, I do get it. And the other offices, I can find on the internet what number to call, and then I can wait for eternity. So everything is doable, and it is always knowing the need and the expertise and matching them. And this is what we're good at, but nobody gives us the chance to actually combine the knowledge and apply it locally. So all our industries are for export. Hence, we don't have a lot that is done in Hebrew. All the infrastructure, we mentioned the acceleration. It is true that part of the advancement is related to hardware development. And this is, by the way, when you compete between the US and China, US is much better in semiconductors, and Israel is very good, and Intel acquired Habana. And we know that in recent years, like you asked about the last 2 years, in recent years, the acceleration, the multiplication, doubling, is every 3 months. And previously, it was by the Moore law every 2 years. So what happened? It's the GPU. And when you use the GPU, you use the data, you use the algorithms, and everything runs at the same homogeneous rate, then you get a much, much better productivity. So this is why I'm furious.
So you don't see a lot of openness in the government sector, or is there any reason for optimism?
It's called management. You need to take without diminishing the might of each and every branch. You need management that integrates the needs and the expertise. And it will be that certain places will take longer. But if we already have built a system for the Ministry of Health, and the fact that it's not deployed because people in the Ministry of Health will tell you it's not needed, it's stupid.
Philip, can you try to take us somewhere a little bit more optimistic? Today there are organizations that don't have any AI in production, while there are organizations that really have AI everywhere. That's a little bit of what Orna is saying as well. What do you think this gap will look like in 5 to 7 years?
Okay, so first of all, I have to say that I deal much more with the private sector. So if there's some difference in the optimism level, it might be biased. But I think that today, what's very interesting, the kind of special organizations that you mentioned that have AI kind of everywhere. What I think really differs them today is something very basic. They have some machine learning somewhere. So you could have like, let's say the basic random forest model that does some of the most straightforward tasks that everyone thinks of right away when they first heard about machine learning, like the lifetime value of a customer, customer churn, user churn, recommender system. All those, anyone who has any organization that has machine learning doing any of those tasks in whatever form, they're like a unique and special organization that we should learn from. Now, what I think is going to happen as we advance, from, let's say, now we're talking about close to the beginning of 2021, what I think we'll see in, let's say, 2026 is something completely different. What I think is going to happen is that this type of machine learning for, let's say, the 80% of the tasks is going to be pretty much commoditized. So I think building models is going to become either automatic or with very, very clear cookbooks of how you do it. And what I think is really going to be the difference between organizations that are kind of with the herd and organizations that are ahead is what we call control of machine learning systems. So it's knowing when you can and can't trust the models, it's finding problems in the model, it's being able to integrate models within larger and more sophisticated systems, so combining it with human decisions elegantly. So all these things are part of something that I call control. But I really think that the first steps are pretty much common for every organization. Every organization has to have some of these tasks that I described earlier that have to be solved. But I think that your way to really navigate and use it as a tool is something that's it's really not solved now. I think it's going to be somewhat solved by 2026, but I definitely think there are going to be huge gaps between companies, and this is really going to affect the way that you can really execute on whatever your digital strategy is. So this is all one thing that's we really focus on in my company on control of machine learning, and we focus especially on automatically finding problems and monitoring and so forth. Now, I think there is something else you have to say. I don't think everything's going to be commoditized in creation of machine learning models. Definitely, there are some tasks that are going to be unique for each organization and that require much and much more research. I'm just not sure that that's where, like, from a revenue point of view, I'm not sure that that's like the mainstream. I think that's more of the long tail. Yeah.
Well, then I want to move to you. You're developing an AI-driven platform for primary care, which seems like a very traditional market. I think you told me that Gartner assumes that 75% of healthcare organizations will have invested in their AI potential by 2021 to improve the overall performance. And the advantage of AI-driven tools for doctors and patients is pretty clear, but can you share some of the reservations or concerns that you encounter with physicians?
Yeah. We do see a growing willingness for AI support to become part of the physician traditional workflow. And one of the main drivers of this change is the overwhelming amount of patient digital data that significantly burden the workflow. And it's a common understanding that humans can not overcome this burden, and it can be solved, and that's done by AI technology that will support the decision and the physicians. And Navina transformed all patient data into an intuitive, concise presentation. This allows the physician to assess each patient in minutes. And yet we still have a long journey until we see the physician using it widely. I think the main challenge is to gain the trust. I believe the best way to get there is to show fast improvement with the performances. As part of your product, you must understand and measure the performance and present to them as part of the workflow. If you know to do that, you can gain the trust much more quickly. From our experience, it's a critical part of your product to gain fast adoption. And there's another thing that is increasing the trust in things that we call a wow moment. We have all these things, many wow moments that led Dirty to roll out with our primary care groups. It's that your product gives some critical insights about the patient that the physician really understands that he would miss without your tool. phone drain, he won't allow himself not to use the product. And it should be as part of his workflow. And we have seen this happening quite a lot.
Yeah, you and Orna both have a very suspicious audience, but in some ways for you, it's easier to, like you said, to gain the trust because, and I've seen it with your product, once a physician sees that he missed something or that he would have missed something critical, then he wouldn't allow himself to not use moving forward.
Part of our presentation is showing some kind of possible and mystic diagnosis, giving some kind of diagnosis overlay with linkage to the right medication and the right concept notes. And once he sees that and can gather in just in a snapshot, it looks very intuitive. So things are going well,
Yeah. Rotem.
Yeah.
AI is a very active research area today, clearly. But it seems that a lot of enterprises are kind of lagging behind in creating value using AI. So I wanted to ask you, what are the main differences between AI solutions in the lab? And Orna kind of hinted to it before when she was talking about academia. What's the difference between AI solutions in the lab and AI solutions in production?
Yeah, so Philip also mentioned some of it before. So as enterprises start to adopt AI in more areas of the business today, we're witnessing a second wave of AI adoption challenges. So if in the first wave, challenges were enterprise maturity, fear of the technology, how enterprises are going to implement it, how they have no idea how to start and where to start. In the second wave, as more enterprises has already accomplished their first steps in experiencing with AI, we see new challenges that appear. So for example, things like scale AI algorithms in production, how to meet regulations using explainability, confidence, bias in mission critical systems, working under scenarios of small amount of labeled data, challenges like how to keep the solution stable and accurate in highly noisy environment, how to reduce heavy maintenance cost of AI solutions that are already in production, and how to monitor the algorithms and create increased return on investment over time, something that Philip already mentioned. So we are witnessing that enterprise today understand that in order to have a functional and accurate AI solution in production, they need much more than creating a mathematical model based on training data. So more holistic approach of AI is needed in order to create a stable and accurate and efficient AI solution in the dynamic, fast-changing, and full of constraints production environment. So as we see it, the main difference is the environment itself. So while the lab environment and the research environment is static, clean, and stable, the production environment and the data in the production environment is dynamic and unpredictable. This is the main reason that solutions that work properly in the lab hardly ever work properly in production. So companies today usually build lab-fitted AI models at this phase of the AI transformation and not full production AI systems. And moving to production AI systems is critical in order to fulfill the full potential of AI in enterprises. Our main focus at BeyondMinds is to bridge the gap between AI solutions in the lab and the AI solutions in production.
Amazing. Philip, you touched upon monetizing as well as Rotem just now. So since the space is a little bit new, or relatively new, then a lot of us don't yet have a clear picture of budgets or a willingness to spend relating to machine learning products. As an executive that meets a lot of clients, are you seeing any interesting trends that have to do with this? Who's willing to pay what?
So it's a very good question. I think it's definitely something that's addressed, or they have to have some approach for anyone that's operating in spaces like myself and like Rotem. I think from my point of view, these 2 years are very interesting years, 2020, 2021. I really think these are the years of transitioning, like a lot of what Rotem just mentioned now, from kind of cool but useless research to real machine learning products. And I think from what I can see during the research phase, there already was a huge willingness to spend, but basically only on salaries and infrastructure, let's say compute power and so forth. And there was something very weird that you could spend sometimes salaries that could reach $17 million per person in some cases, but then not willing to spend a few $1,000s for a product. And I think the real reason is because it was really research. It's just like a professor in the university won't pay for someone to do his research for him. But I think once it becomes a product and it goes through the transformation from being something in the lab to something that works in production, then it becomes a product and it's judged like a product. Like when you use Waze, you couldn't care less what happens in the background because you have to get where you're going. So I think what I'm beginning to see in many different companies is that they're just judging this as products. So when you judge this as product, you think, okay, if this recommender system will increase my revenue by 30%, then that's what it's worth, and then it's judged like that. And what's interesting is when you judge it versus in-house solutions, which is another way to kind of calculate what it's worth to you. So data scientists or machine learning researchers are very, very, very expensive. So any comparison to in-house solutions, like if you want to create your own machine learning platform, even whatever you calculate is going to be very expensive, and then they tend to be much more expensive than you planned as well. So yeah, I'm seeing a huge change, and in these types of spaces, like the space I'm operating in, I think it's pretty clear to anyone who has I wouldn't say anyone, but most organizations, it's pretty clear to them that you don't build what you can buy. You're not gonna. It's going to be a less good product, and it's definitely not worth. It's definitely not worth more manpower.
Yeah, that sounds like a trend that should work in favor of both you and Rotem. Orna, let's move back to a body that doesn't like to pay so much. So there's a lot of discussion around if, who, and how should AI be regulated. And I read recently a quote of a Google executive that said, when talking about AI regulation, that companies such as Google cannot just build promising new technologies and let market forces decide how it will be used, right? It's equally under their responsibility to make sure that the technology is harnessed for good. Can you share some of your thoughts on the subject?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say that, when we talk research and development for a second, we're talking about risking, saving, and preferring growth, right? And then digital literacy did not catch up with the digital infrastructure and AI-based companies like Google and Amazon and others. And what we found is that suddenly people start understanding the data has a value. Data has a value when it applies to development drugs. It applies to developing imaging machines and understanding. I've been talking to people. So today imaging is used a lot like old film was, except that it is on a high resolution screen and you can retrieve it easier. So you don't look at volume, you don't look at viability and such. So a lot more things can be done. But prime issue is that suddenly the value of data became a source of conflict. Because you can see that companies like Facebook, and they violate your privacy. Google was penalized in Europe heavily for doing that, but I think Facebook is much more there utilizing your personalized data. You see that the question of accountability comes forward. Who is accountable? The user of the device that has algorithms or the writer of the algorithm? Then safety and security. Where you apply, and I know that Rotem is familiar with this issue from his work, But when you apply some machine, some automated vehicle, you want it to do what it is geared for, and not to go into the exceptions of hitting you back or doing something that wasn't intended. And the question is, how do you regulate and make sure that it is safe? So then comes a very important issue that we always hear about: transparency and explainability. Because we want to know that when we operate in the operation room a patient with a robot, that we understand exactly the decision of the robot, where it goes, and the same when we play with our money or anything of the sort. So we want to be able to not only apply machine learning, but also to be able to explain in each state of the machine what exactly is happening. So then comes a fairness and non-discrimination. You all remember the HR story of Amazon, where they tried to apply algorithms, and since women are more modest and no women to hire, Renana and I are out now, and there are several other elements that are all coming in the ethics and regulation. Now, I love regulation because I come from Datacom. And in Datacom, once there was standard protocols, and I come from before there were standardized protocols, then you could interoperate. And this is a very important factor about data sharing. If you understand exactly how not to violate ethics and how to standardize, actually, you can utilize much more of the data that is available. And right today, even though we have developed quite a bit in the last few years, we are using only a small percentage of the data, because the questions that we are asking are pretty dependent on applications and not on the flexibility of APIs, for example. So I think this is a broad area. It's a fascinating area. If we try to exaggerate and to say that we're 100% proof, then our machines will not move, because they will spend all the time on the regulatory side. But if we want to be certain to give our data, by the way, anybody who knows I'm a cancer patient, and I gave out my data for everybody in order to find somebody who knows something about the kind of mutations that I demonstrate. Nobody came back. At the end of the day, I went back to my expert doctor, and he was able, based on experience, to give me the treatment that makes me talk to you at this time. So the issue is that it's very important for us to not to give our data for free and to pay a lot for somebody who processed it. We need to be fairly partners in this value creation, and we need to understand it. And right now, the digital literacy is low, and I think it was McKinsey who said that we need to educate 1.3% of the education yearly for 10 years in order to meet the adoption rate of AI in a broader way. So what I have to say about regulation, it's actually as fascinating as standards were, because it means a lot about how far-reaching our applications can be.
Yeah, and I think that almost more than any technology that we've witnessed, regulation is going to become more and more relevant and important. I have a ton of questions. We don't have a lot of time, but I do want to address two more questions.
Some of the bigger, some of the biggest players will have to separate businesses, because the dominance that they have, the rate of growth that they show, is actually pulling out value from other segments that could have been richer and better fed if they owned their own
Yes.
contribution.
Yes. I want to address two last questions to you, Rotem and Ronen. Rotem, let's start with you. We all agree that eventually AI and machine learning usage in general, and in the context of digital transformation or production, will cross industry boundaries. But where do you see in the short and the midterm those technologies really picking up first?
Yeah, so these are really interesting questions. It depends on a lot of parameters. Given the fact that we're still at the beginning of AI transformation, different levels of maturity can be found across industries. As we see it as a company, an AI transformation process is much more successful when driven from the top down. It requires the collaboration of different stakeholders in order to the business, and depends on significant investment for changing the way business works today. So if the top management is committed to transform the business, it is possible to create value with AI in the short term in almost any industry. And I think that Orna also talked about it in the government part. Maybe the collaboration and the willingness to invest a lot of money in AI is not existing right now. So, but when looking at specific industries, from our experience, the financial services and manufacturing industries are more mature in their AI transformation journey than other industries. Also, some insurance companies progressed greatly in their AI transformation within the last, let's say, few years. And as I said earlier, my suggestion for enterprises is to start transforming their business as soon as they can in order to stay competitive and to become more efficient in their processes.
Ronen, you have one tough industry on your hands. So we've known each other for a very long time. And when you were still thinking of which vertical do you want to apply your AI and multimodal expertise, all those long years of experience, you were still not sure which direction you're going to go to. Can you talk about some of the specific technological challenges of AI in the healthcare setting?
I think the main issue, I want to relate to what Orna was saying about the regulation and the ethics, and I think it's part of the answer. I think that you're doing all kinds of very smart algorithm that can be explained. It's really hard to implement and give it to the physician and making the way to use it. So I think the main challenge is because for technology, it's not just giving some kind of a black box deep learning stuff or whatever. You have to find a way to explain how you got your results. And if you're showing some kind of passing or missing diagnosis from which encounter you have seen that, or some kind of release from the hospital, if you're showing some kind of maybe some kind of connection between medications and problems, show from where you got this connection. Everything has to be explained. And it's pretty hard to find a way to do that. So it's also like a paradox between like deep learning black box to let's say based tools, the student support system. So I think you have to find the right balance, but you must find a way how to get the right technology to get everything being explained. If you can explain it, you're going to have a lot of time to implement for the physician, and of course for a regulator it will be much more harder. You have to do all the clinical trials and show your value in much more time. So I think that will be the main concern or challenge between AI and how you explain it.
Guys, I had about 7 to 8 more questions prepared, but we're out of time. This was fun. It was interesting. We didn't cover everything I wanted to, but thank you so much for joining me, and thank you all for watching. So Philip, Orna, Rotem, Ronen, thank you. And
thank you very much, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep doing a good AI work.
And happy birthday.
Ciao. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Enjoy your day. Bye.